I think I'm sophisticated cause I'm living my life like a good homo sapien. But all around me everybody's multiplying and they're walking around like flies, man. So I'm no better than the animals sitting in their cages in the zoo, man. Cause compared to the flowers and the birds and the trees, I am an ape man. I think I'm so educated and I'm so civilized cause I'm a strict vegetarian. But with the overpopulation and inflation and starvation and the crazy politicians, I don't feel safe in this world no more. I don't wanna die in a nuclear war. I wanna sail away to a distant shore and make like an ape man. I'm an ape man, I'm an ape man, no I'm an ape man.
The Kinks and Ape Man. An appropriate song given our topic today, which is the evolution of the human mind. You're listening to Philosophy Talk, the program that questioned everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you, as always, from the studios of 91.7 KALW, San Francisco's oldest, most innovative public radio station.
Continuing conversations that we began with our little Stone Age brains at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
And then we leave the Stone Age and come to the modern radio, and from modern radio we migrate to the blog, hyper-modern stuff. Visit our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org. Don and I will both post something up there after the show, I think.
Well, that's optimistic, Ken, because I really have to be educated today. You need to explain to me a little about what evolutionary psychology is before we get started. I mean, I know what evolution is. Hume told us that psychology, that's learning. You know, you see things and then you learn from what you see. I mean, what's the big deal?
And you know about Darwin, right? And you think if you just put Darwin and Hume together, you've got it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite that way, because Hume says the mind starts out as kind of a blank slate. That wasn't his vocabulary, but he thought there was nothing in the mind at all except some capacities to associate ideas. But evolutionary psychology teaches us that there's a lot of stuff already in the mind that natural selection puts there. And the reason it puts it there is, look, think about life, any kind of animal life. It faces four problems called the four F's. It's the feeding, fleeing, fighting, reproducing worry. You've got to be able to recognize what's food and what isn't. You've got to be able to know whether the fight or flee, who's a foe, who's a friend, and you've got to be able to recognize who are potential mates. And you've got to come prepared to recognize that stuff. So natural selection designs all this stuff in our brains in advance to help us solve those problems.
So the picture is that way back in Stone Age times, way back when humans evolved, they evolved already from animals that had solved these problems for their own particular circumstance. And then what was specifically human evolved on top of that. And it was given the timescale of evolution, that's all happened way back in the past. All the things we do are based on that.
Yeah, so, our ability to reason, our moral sense, our ability to, again, decide who's a friend, who's a foe, to engage in kind of mutual cooperative activity, all that stuff was built into us by natural selection. And it did it by not doing this Humean thing, by designing this general purpose mechanism. Some evolutionary psychologists claim that you couldn't evolve a general purpose mechanism.
Well, given that we don't just have a general purpose mechanism, do we all have the same special purpose mechanisms? For example, could women and men have basically different kind of minds on this kind of explanation?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. And, to help us start to answer that question and think about it, we'll turn, as always, to our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen. She files this report.
If you doubt that your brain is working according to ancient evolved patterns, grab a member of the opposite sex and do some exploring.
You can either do this in a virtual city or real city or...
Lucy Jacobs is a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley.
Any way you do it, men will go out and come back having explored a city and be able to draw a map of the main arteries and have the distances correct and the angles, the big landmarks. Whereas females will come back and they might get the distances wrong, but they'll have much more fine-grained detail. For example, I go to a new city and I walk out of my hotel and I will remember that it was this shop, and then I passed a cafe, and then there was a bus stop, and then there was the museum, and I'll remember all of that, and I'll be able to recognize them again, and I could reproduce them accurately, but I wouldn't necessarily know the compass direction. It's going out into the same environment and bringing back two sets of, like, harvesting different information.
And we aren't the only ones. Males and females in many other polygamous species, and we humans are generally considered polygamous, do the same thing. Lucy Jacobs says it's a sex-specific behavior that we've evolved over time.
What you see in polygamous mammals is that males actually compete with other males by running around and making maps of where the females are. And females has to stay in a small area and raise her young. And what she actually wants to do is to maximize kind of the harvesting rate of that area. So she wants to know where everything is exactly, keep track of the changes of resources over time.
We may have language and the ability to fly airplanes, but if you look at our basic brain functioning, we're really just another animal.
The basics of how you organize your day, how you respond emotionally to your family, to the people you work with, how you move in space, how you respond to simple decisions like, what do I eat in this restaurant? All these kinds of things that really take up a large part of our daily psyche, we probably have in common with all other mammals. The way you might respond to going into a social gathering where someone launches a verbal attack on you, I mean, that's not any different than a wolf walking into its pack and someone giving it a nasty threat and a bite or something like that. And the same systems are going to be evoked in the body. The same neurotransmitters are going to be released, and same stress hormones and all the rest of that. Most of what we do, there's a huge amount of unconscious processing that goes on. When you think you've made a decision consciously, it turns out you haven't.
Which leaves us with the questions, well, what about us is ours alone? Are we individuals of free will, or just acting out on our evolutionary programming? For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
Thanks, Amy, for that helpful report. I now understand a little bit more about my wife's behavior. When we're in a new city, we go out for a walk, and she can tell me where all the jewelry stores are when we get back to the hotel room. Now, I'm a little confused because I didn't think there were jewelry stores on the Savannah, but we'll resolve all these problems later. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Let's bring on our guest. We're joined today by Leda Cosmides. She's professor of psychology at the UC Santa Barbara. She's a founder of evolutionary psychology and one of its major figures. She's the co-author with John Tooby of What is Evolutionary Psychology and the co-editor of a really important collection, The Adapted Mind, Evolutionary Psychology and the Generation of Culture. Leda, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Leda. John Perry here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Leda, why don't you start by giving us one phenomenon or one example of that really makes evolutionary psychology shine, really points out the power of this way of thinking about things. Your favorite example?
Well, actually, there were a number of things that were said before that I wouldn't actually, as an evolutionary psychologist, quite agree with. But
let's start with what you think is the really powerful insight.
Let's start with a blank slate here and tell us how you think of it.
Right. The claim has never been that there are no general purpose mechanisms in the human mind. The claim is that the mind can't be nothing but a general purpose mechanism. It can't. Hume's view of a very small number of learning mechanisms that are with no specialization just won't be able to track fitness in any real environment. There are real problems that organisms need to solve, and actually those problems differ sometimes from species to species. I don't actually expect the human mind to be tracking the minds of other mammals in many different respects.
So what's a good example that explains your way of looking at it?
Okay, well, evolutionary psychology, I'll use an example that has to do with the problem of avoiding inbreeding, for example. Let me say a few words about evolutionary psychology in general, and then apply it to the inbreeding situation. Evolutionary psychologists are basically cognitive scientists. They're taking the same approach as any cognitive scientist. They're thinking about the human mind as a system designed to process information. It can be described in the physicalist terms of neuroscience, or its operations can be described computationally in terms of programs that process information. Then the question for any cognitive scientist is, what are the programs that reliably develop in the human brain? And the point at which evolutionary psychology differs from many other approaches to the cognitive sciences is we think that there are important clues to the nature of these programs that can be found by thinking about what are the kinds of adaptive problems that our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have had to solve. It's not that these programs came into existence in the last 10,000 years. It's probably that there just hasn't been much change in them in the last 10,000 years because they're programs of great complexity. So take, for example, the problem of avoiding inbreeding. This is a problem that occurs for many, many different species. There are problems of deleterious recessives, inbreeding depression. It's a bad idea to inbreed for a lot of reasons.
So inbreeding is like incest.
Incest, yes.
And the problem is that
yes.
it leads to birth defects.
It leads to birth defects.
It's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea. It can make your offspring more susceptible to pathogens. It's a bad idea for many reasons.
Okay, but
so
evolutionary psychology is going to give us a distinctive hold on why humans...
Yes. So, for
how
example,
humans cope with this problem, right?
I'll take it from the adaptive problem to the learning mechanism involved to the moral sentiments it generates.
Okay.
And some surprising things about that. So when you think about the selection pressures, this is a problem. There have to be some mechanisms for solving. Now, when you look at social psychology, they'll tell you that who you're most likely to be attracted to as a mate is somebody who's similar to you, who lives in close proximity. Who has the same values and very much like you. Well,
that sounds like a family member.
That's right. It sounds like your brother or sister, doesn't it?
Yeah, sounds just like my sister, my closest friend when I was a kid.
Exactly. So given that here's a person with so many traits that would otherwise make them an appropriate mate, we need some sort of mechanisms that turn off what would otherwise be, sexual interest in that person. Then the question is, what's the nature of the mechanism involved, and what emotions does it entrain? If I asked you to imagine, I apologize for doing this, but if I ask you to imagine passionately tongue kissing your sister or your brother, most people go, yes, that's blah. That's a reaction that most people have. Now, the thing is, one of the interesting questions is, how does your mind even know who counts as a brother or sister? Is it just what people tell you? Well, this is an adaptive problem that that's been in effect for a very long time before, long predates language, and plus there are situations where people have an interest in not telling you the truth necessarily about who your closest kin are and how close kin they are. I mean, your mother may want you to be as helpful to your half sib as your full sib, or your stepfather to your step sib, and so forth. So. And it may call them all brother and sister for that reason.
So what's the evolutionary answer to how we manage this problem?
Well, with one of our former students, Deborah Lieberman, we've been looking at the architecture of kin detection in humans. And we've been focusing on sibling detection. And one of the things that we've been finding, there had been hints about this from the prior anthropological literature, but you've got to ask yourself, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you're living in a hunter-gatherer band, what are the cues that would reliably predict who is my close sibling? Well, there are two. There are potentially many, but two good ones would be, well, who came out of my mother's body? That's a pretty good indication that they're at least a half sib. And that's a cue that can be used by an older to detect a younger sibling. It won't work for the younger one because we can't travel back in time, right? But for an older detecting a younger son, who being living in proximity with your mother when your mother gives birth to another baby is probably a good indication that that's a sibling. And another developmental cue that can be used is, how long did I co-reside with this person between 0 and 18? And it seems that that's a very, very powerful cue that the mind uses to categorize somebody as a sibling.
So
Leda, I'm gonna continue this strand in a little bit. Continue this conversation. I'll remind our listeners you're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our subject today is evolution and the human mind. Our guest is Leda Cosmides of the UC Santa Barbara.
So we're talking about the basics of evolutionary psychology. Coming up, we'll challenge some of these ideas. How does evolution account for the cultural differences, which can be enormous, between peoples? If all our behavior is pre-programmed, why does each person seem so unique?
We'll take your calls after the break. Philosophy Talk will be right back.
Well, you can ask me, mister, because I know. Tell them soul-sucking preachers that come on down and see. Pardon man, pardon monkey, baby, that's me.
Bruce Springsteen, the boss, with Part Man, Part Monkey. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing evolution and the human mind. Join us. The number is 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, call toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. Do we have Stone Age brains? How can you tell? Is your brain more Stone Age than mine? You can also email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest is Leda Cosmides. Leda, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about
Yes.
before the break.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
put some words in your mouth. See if we can cut to the chase. Let me.
I think I can cut to the chase pretty quickly if you give me a sec.
Okay.
What you can do is you can ask people about their moral sentiments about incest, about consensual sibling incest with third parties, not even themselves. And the idea is, if some of our moral sentiments are the output of mechanisms that are designed to affect our own behavior, then you should see differences between people as a function of these developmental inputs, like how long you were raised with somebody, how long did you co-reside with them as a child. And it turns out that it doesn't matter if the person's actually a genetic relative or not. If the learning mechanism involved is looking for years of co-residence to categorize, you as my brother or you as my sister, then it'll produce the disgust at the idea of having sex with that person and so forth. And so when we did experiments like this, and we asked people to, rank the moral wrongness of a whole bunch of different acts, it turns out that if you co-resided with your siblings for a long time, the cue that ancestrally would have been a good cue that this is an actual sibling. You just thought that incest was more morally wrong than other people did. So one of these moral sentiments is being very nicely predicted by the input to a mechanism designed for kin detection.
Okay, Leda, that's a very helpful, great example. Let me see if I can put it kind of the way a philosopher might look at it. I mean, if you tried to be a Humean and you thought, well, people just notice that they get a lot of birth defects from incest, well, that's very unlikely. I mean, it takes several generations to notice that, even if you're keeping good records, which I doubt they did on the Savannah.
And
so here's a bit of knowledge that seems to have found its way into the basic way we perceive and react to the people we live with, that in a sense no one knew. It's reflected in a mechanism that couldn't have come from individual experience or culture. It had to come from thousands of years of selection. And it not only leads to behavior, but to feelings of disgust. So this kind of mechanism, if the mind is full of this kind of mechanism, it does seem like an incredibly important research program to find out what they are.
That's right. And it turns out that the same mechanism governs both disgust at incest and altruism towards your relatives, to your siblings.
That is to say, just the one side of it is be disgusted by the thought of sex with your relatives, and the other side is have this propensity to be nice to your relatives.
That's right. That's right.
Because, and the evolutionary explanation for that is that by being nice, you have greater chances of reproductive success, of your genes getting into the next generation and then the next generation and all that.
That's right. It's called kin selection theory, and it basically has to do with that a mechanism can be both present in both you and your close kin, and so it can replicate itself through increasing your own reproduction or increasing your kin members' reproduction.
Right. Remind our listeners, you're listening to Philosophy Talk. You can join we're talking about evolution and the human mind. We'd love to know what you think about this topic. You can join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Or outside the Bay Area, it's 1-800-525-9917. John, you got an email you want to read?
Yeah, here's an email. Do you believe there's a principled way of determining what percentage of our cognitive faculties are a result of evolution by natural selection? That's basically the question.
As
What's
opposed
your
to-
answer?
As
Is this
opposed
as
to
opposed
just
to-
being an accident, I guess?
As
or
opposed
something?
to special creation, or as
No, I
opposed
think
to-
probably people who there are lots of people who find evolutionary psychology controversial, and I don't think they're all creationists.
Well, I guess it would depend on what you counted as a faculty. I mean, our faculty
That's
of,
right.
say, decoding the hidden message in people's conversation probably is dates back not quite as far as this kinship thing.
Let me put it. I'll put the question another way. Let's try something later. John and you agreed that the Humean line. You just notice that people, if you marry, your kin, your close
That's
kin, then there's going to be decline.
Right.
But look, people have been around for a long time, right? And there's and we have this thing, culture, that transmits acquired knowledge, right? I know
Yes.
about baseball. And I transmit my knowledge of baseball to Kiyoshi. I know about quantum physics. I transmit my knowledge. So we have culture.
Actually, you don't transmit that much about quantum physics,
Well, I know.
but more about baseball.
Yeah, more about baseball.
More about
so
baseball.
Look,
And
knowledge
there's a reason
that it
for
took
that.
centuries to acquire builds up, and then we pass it on from generation to generation. I don't. Well, how does the
yeah.
anti-Humean line that you and John were?
Well, that's of course true. I mean, there's nothing in evolutionary psychology that denies the facts of cultural transmission or of accumulate that knowledge can accumulate over time. The question is, by virtue of what cognitive mechanisms do we acquire cultural knowledge? Is it a blank slate kind of mind that's doing the acquisition or not? I mean, if it was a blank slate mind doing the acquisition, it's not clear to me why it wouldn't be just as easy to communicate quantum physics as baseball. On the other hand, if you think about a mind that's designed with mechanisms, some of which are specialized for understanding coalitional aggression, intergroup aggression, and so forth, a lot of the understanding of coalitional games is very easy for us.
Coalitional games. You're help me understand what you mean by that.
Baseball, baseball, football. These are all games where you have 3 or more individuals cooperating to achieve a common goal, and the common goal is to beat the other team. They're a form of ritualized aggression. Ritualized intergroup aggression. It's something that people find very easy to understand.
If you think about how complicated a human being is and how good we are at understanding each other and anticipating what we do, compared to other things that are much less complicated, like computers that some of us have great problems understanding and dealing with, that seems to speak in favor of your hypothesis that there are just algorithms that date way back for dealing with these things that were true even on the savannah, namely other irritating humans around.
If you think about the story of Little Red Riding Hood, it's very easy for a human mind to understand and remember. It's very hard for a digital computer to understand and remember. But if you think about a 20-digit number, hard for a human, easy for the computer. The nature of the programs determines what's easy to remember, what's interesting to pass on, whether you can get the gist of a story and so forth. I mean, we're one of the few species on Earth that engages in multi-individual cooperation, with non-relatives. I mean, ants and bees do, of course, but those are sisters who are doing it. Most species don't do this. Chimpanzees do, we do, and those are the only uncontroversial examples. It might be very difficult for a member of a species that doesn't engage in this kind of coalitional cooperation, including coalitional aggression, to understand something like baseball.
I think you're right. I mean, I think some kind of capacity for culture, some kind of capacity for complex cooperative activity is designed into us by natural selection. I think that would be there. I know there are some people who would deny that, but I think they have a heavy burden to bear. But some people are impressed by the cultural variability of human societies. And they say, look, cultures vary radically from one another. And so even if a kind of capacity for culture is built into us, it doesn't constrain culture very much. And so almost anything goes. I mean, how would you respond to that line of argument?
I'd say 2 things. One is it's not helpful to say that humans are endowed with a capacity for culture unless you say, what are the programs by virtue of which we have that capacity? And is it a single one? Are there many different ones? I would say there's many different ones. Many of the inference mechanisms we have that are specialized for certain kinds of understanding. Like, for example, there's a literature on theory of mind reading. How do you infer the beliefs, desires, and intentions of other people? It's appearing more and more that that's the result of a domain-specific inference system that develops around 18 months of age, and there's some controversy about exactly when it develops. But that's something that people do everywhere. Everywhere you go, people will make inferences about what other people believe and want and intend to do. How variable or uniform cultures are, I don't know that there's any sensible way of measuring something like that. But what you should find is that the minds of people everywhere, that they develop a certain repertoire of programs that govern how they interpret what's going on around them.
So Leda, let me ask you this question. Compare two things. One is what you told us about, this avoiding incest mechanism. Another, take something that's very cultural, like take the Jewish prohibition against eating pork. People have hypothesized that came about because it was rather dangerous to eat certain kinds of foods. So there we have something that no individual would have noticed, nor even probably any generation, built into the culture. It seems to me rather similar to the kind of thing that you say is built in evolutionary. Are culture and evolution parallel streams in that way for giving us knowledge that goes beyond individual experience?
They're interacting streams. I think that the idea that the prohibition against pork came up for health reasons I think that's been discredited.
Oh, too bad.
But it's okay. But one of the things that is true is that food taboos crop up all over the planet, and that seems to be a property of the kinds of, we're omnivores, and as omnivores we have to have specialized learning mechanisms for figuring out which things are edible, gravel not, avocados yes, in the environment, and which things are inedible. And we have a lot of different mechanisms that are involved in this, including certain kinds of taste preferences and so forth. But another one is a cultural learning mechanism that has to do with, it's something like everything's forbidden except that which is permitted, right? So if you see another member of your culture group eating something, then that's food. That can be defined as food. And you get if you think of the mechanism as having a structure a little bit like that, then you can see how it's going to be very easy to have food taboos crop up. There's also the problem that food is also a source of contagion and pathogens. So food's a discussed object too. So you're on a knife's edge with food.
Right. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about evolution in the human mind with our guest Leda Cosmides. You can join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134, 415-841-4134. What do you think about evolution in the human mind? Does cultural variability undermine its claims? Join us. And we have a caller on the line now who did just that. Paul in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Paul.
Hi. My comment is about ADHD, attention deficit disorder, as an inherited condition. And I know there's some people that think, I don't know if you've ever heard of the hunter-farmer paradigm as an explanation for that.
For ADHD? I've not heard about that.
So how does that go?
How's that go?
It may be a little hokey, I think less scientifically based, but it goes that the distracted attention deficit person always has their eyes peeled, and as for hunting and staying alert, as compared to the farmer that has to be very patient. And
so the attention deficit disorder phenomenon might actually have been advantageous in a hunter-gatherer society. Is that the point? And yet in our society it's not advantageous. Does evolutionary psychology help us understand that?
Well, Paul, thanks. It's a general question, Leda. The things that were adaptive for our Stone Age progenitors might not be adaptive now.
Absolutely.
So I mean, how does evolutionary psychology deal with that? What's the significance of that fact? That what was adaptive then may be maladaptive now?
It's of the greatest significance. I mean, there are all kinds of things that make sense if you're a hunter-gatherer that don't necessarily make sense now. Some of them with deleterious effects and some with good effects. So, for example, having a preference for sugars and fats. You just can't get too much sugar and fat if you're a hunter-gatherer. I mean, the sugar is coming from fruit, and the fat is coming from game animals, which are very lean. You're fat limited. We don't have an off switch, or as much of an off switch for those things. On the other hand, dietary fiber. We all know that that's really good for us, but if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're getting diet. You don't have to look for dietary fiber. Your gathered foods and natural foods, as opposed to domesticated plants, have tons of dietary fiber in them. We don't have a particular positive desire for those things. So when you see fast food restaurants, they're not like for high fiber. A good way to lose money would be to start the fast food restaurant of high fiber brand things. That's not going to make that's not going to make the money.
But look, this raises a pretty fundamental philosophical problem, in a way, because it's the is-ought problem. So we look back to our Stone Age past, and we see we were designed for life as Stone Age hunter-gatherers, right? And we spent a long time like that, but now we're in these cultures where things are radically different. Now, we ask ourselves, how ought we to live? What culture ought we to have? We can't look back to anything about... there's this stuff that some people criticize evolutionary psychology, I think on illegitimate grounds, for things like saying rape is okay, because there's an argument... I know. There's an argument that it was, at some point, for some men in some conditions, an adaptive strategy to rape certain women.
But that would be...
And people think that's condoning rape. But
that's absurd.
Yeah, but look, go back to your moral sense about incest avoidance. I mean, why should we care that we had this, naturally selected impulse to say yuck to incest, just because it would work for our progenitors?
You don't have to care. It's not a moral theory. It's not. Yeah. It's a theory about. It can be a theory sometimes about our moral sentiments, but that doesn't make them right. I mean, sometimes in certain places people have moral sentiments that are quite repulsive, right? I mean, sometimes people think it's right and good to slaughter people. I don't.
So what the evolutionary psychologists would want to explain is why we tend to have the moral sentiments that we do, not
that's right, and
why
also,
we're right to have them or why it's good to have them or anything like that.
Well, take the incest moral sentiment. We've pretty much distinguished now between having sexual relations and generating new people.
That's right.
If a brother and a sister or first cousins want to get married, but they want to take careful steps through genetic screening or just using contraception, is there any real moral reason to prohibit it?
Let's take a quick.
That's a question for philosophers and not for evolutionary psychologists.
Right.
Exactly. I'm serious. And but on the other hand, let me put it in a different context. If you want to think about how you arrange social arrangements, knowing what kinds of moral sentiments people have can be very useful. For example, Freud famously thought that people really wanted to sleep with their siblings. But, Freud, in Victorian times, boys and girls were kept very separate from one another, and Freud was nursed by a wet nurse, not by his natural mother.
Freud was one weird guy living in a weird city.
But is he a weird guy in the following sense?
Well, Leda, I want you to hold that thought. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing evolution and the human mind with Leda Cosmides of the UC Santa Barbara.
Evolutionary psychology is pretty controversial. It's been accused of skimping on empirical support. And some people think that even if it doesn't condone racism and things like that, it at least makes it too easy to condone them. Coming up, we'll invite our guest, Leda Cosmides, to address these issues.
A little further, and we'll take some of your calls. Philosophy Talk will be right back.
Right, Daddy, right. Hi-yo, dinosaur. Right, Daddy, right. Get 'em, man. Like Hipsville.
The Hollywood Argyles and Alley Oop. For those of you of my generation, that'll bring back memories of the musically deprived 50s. For younger people, probably just feelings of disgust. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing evolution and the human mind with Leda Cosmides of the UC Santa Barbara. Join us by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Hey, and you guys outside the Bay Area, you can call us too without paying a dime. 1-800-525-9917. I'll repeat that. 1-800-525-9917. And you can email us comments at philosophytalk.org.
And Pat in San Francisco has called in. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Pat.
Yeah, I have a question. I've noticed when I've gone backpacking into the high country that packs of animals, when food seems to be scarce, that homosexuality seems to occur maybe in a way to control the population. Is that something that could be part of that evolutionary process?
Thanks for that. Thanks for the call,
Pat. You've noticed this on your backtracking back. I mean, it'd take a long time to notice that, wouldn't it? I mean, how long do you observe these animals?
Oh, for weeks on end.
Wow, that's interesting.
Well, Jane in San Francisco is on the line too. Jane, welcome to Philosophy Talk. Jane, are you there?
Yeah, finally. Okay.
What's your What's your comment or question?
I'm really fascinated that maybe this long-time question of mine can be answered here. Manioc or cassava is a basic staple of many people in the world, but it's highly poisonous if it's not soaked and leached and drained and highly processed. And, you know, how are things like this discovered?
Thanks. Leda, you want to answer either of those questions?
Well, I think that raises an interesting question about the kind of improvisational intelligence that humans have. I mean, I don't think that we're just like chimpanzees or just like baboons or just like other primates. We do have abilities to solve novel problems, but there needs to be an evolutionary account of those as well. And not just an evolutionary account, there needs to be a cognitive account. I mean, people think cognitive psychologists know how people solve novel problems, like figuring out what to do with the cassava to make it not toxic. But I am a cognitive psychologist. Let me tell you, cognitive psychologists have no clue how people solve problems like that. It's a really deep question. What kinds of cognitive architecture do you need to be able to figure out such things?
But that makes me wonder. Some people will say, okay, so our minds, our brains, let's grant, our brains first evolved to solve the problems of our Stone Age, the adaptive problems we faced on the savannah during the Pleistocene. But, that brain kind of was over-designed in some sense. I mean, because it thought of quantum physics, it solved this problem about cassava roots, it did all this amazing stuff that, it far outstrips any of the problems that our progenitors face.
I don't buy that. I mean, it certainly can solve all those things as a byproduct of its design, but that doesn't mean it's over-designed for the problems we had to solve. I mean, dealing with the social world is incredibly complicated. It's a chess match of that requires great strategic abilities. Dealing with making a living when you can't go to the store, where everything that you're trying to eat is running away from you, or has to be dug out of the ground, and then its toxins have to be denatured through cooking or some other sort of process. These are complicated things. Figuring out that if you use the larva of the beetle at this during these particular months, it has poison on it. You could put that on the tip of your arrow. Man, throw me in the desert, I'm not going to be able to figure that out.
So let me see if I could get the picture right here. Evolutionary psychologists really emphasize the fact that there are these Darwinian algorithms, these things that were built into us due to evolution far predating human evolution and the lives of our early ancestors. But that doesn't preclude that the very design of a brain that supports those things could also sort of as a spandrel, as people like to say, that is kind of as a structural accident, have all sorts of other valuable things that we use all the time now. Like, say, the ability to waste time doing philosophy or things like that.
But being a professor.
But again, I want to press you just a little bit on the controversy. Some people find this controversial, and I think we're at a point where the controversy starts to come out. Because, see, people accuse evolutionary psychology, I know you're going to reject the accusation, of mostly making up just those stories. Now, and not having any empirical. I know. But let me put it out. Let me put it out there. And here's one of the reasons they might think something like that. So we got this complex capacity. We can do quantum physics. We can solve this problem about cassava roots. We can do differential equations. All this stuff. Now, given the capacity, infer back to the adaptive story. Well, we weren't adapted for doing quantum physics. So how are you going to decide what is the thing for which it was adaptive? And how it's a solution to just that thing, right? I mean, so some people think it's empirically empty for that kind of reason.
Well, they've got the whole thing backwards, and part of it is because of using terms like capacity. The real story is going to be when people figure out what those mechanisms are. And the problem with psychology, with the study of the human mind, is that most of the design of the human mind is currently unknown. It's not that we know all of the programs that exist in the human mind and are just making up stories. Well, a story is actually an explanation, but explanations for why they came to be that way. It's a program. Evolutionary psychology is a program of discovery. It's a way of having hypotheses about what mechanisms might exist in the mind that allow you. So you have a theory about an adaptive problem. You do a task analysis. What would a program well designed for solving this problem, what computational properties would it have? Then you can design experiments specifically to go in search of those mechanisms and discover things that are previously unknown. The case of the incest mechanism, that's not something that people knew before. When it comes, you mentioned racism before. It can lead you to things that where other people are being misled. So, for example, social psychologists who were not taking a particularly evolutionary stance kept finding something very peculiar, which is that it looked like people were spontaneously, automatically encoding the race of everybody they encountered in a way that didn't change with social context, along with the sex and age. Now, sex and age makes sense from an evolutionary point of view because, knowing something that somebody is a teenage girl or a toddler boy, it supports lots of inferences about their behavior. But race, that makes no sense from an evolutionary point of view. The idea that you would have brain mechanisms designed to encode somebody's race. Hunter-gatherers move by foot. They're nomadic. They don't go very far. They're not going to run into people, even if you can give some, race is a funky concept scientifically anyway, but even if they're not going to encounter people phenotypically different enough to count as a different race. Natural selection can't design mechanisms for encoding a dimension of the social world that did not exist.
Okay, Leda, here's something that came in by email, which is clearly a dimension of the social world that did not exist. It's from one of your University of California colleagues. Says, I'm an archaeologist and I also teach biological anthropology. I think evolutionary psychology has it mostly wrong. It is based on stereotypes of human behavior that are no longer accepted by anthropologists, the people who study these cultures. Anything our brains have in common had to evolve over 100,000 years, not 10,000. Well, and it does seem that we do have some programming in our limbic systems, while the things we value about being human is cortical. Well, how do you react to that?
Well, I would never claim that we have complex mechanisms designed in the last 10,000 years.
Yeah, that wasn't. Yeah.
I don't know what in particular this person is referring to, and I don't know what stereotypes they're thinking about. So it's a little bit hard for me to respond specifically.
I know what kind of. I know since I read this stuff a lot and hear these accusations. I'm a fan of evolutionary psychology, so don't get me wrong. But people think, look, evolutionary psychologist says this stuff about men are designed to be more promiscuous, but as a evolutionary strategy than women, and people say, that's just some kind of stereotype that's kind of culturally bound and variable. And how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think that that's an oversimplification about what evolutionary psychologists say. But
I agree.
Then the person's argument has to be with the entire field of evolutionary biology and behavioral ecology.
It is.
Because when you look across species, there's a basic principle of sexual selection that is whichever sex invests the most in offspring becomes a limited resource for the other sex that the other sex competes for. Yeah. When it's males that are investing, there are some species like seahorses and jacanas, lily catchers, these birds, where the males invest more in offspring than the females. And in those species, you've got females competing for access to the males. The females are larger and more aggressive, and so forth. The debate there. Then they have to talk to the entire field of evolutionary biology.
Well, I'm not sure. John Dupre, who was our guest a few weeks ago on genetic determinants, he's one of the big critics of evolutionary psychology. Mm-hmm. He says, I'll just quote a little bit from him. The evolutionary psychology of sex and gender offers us mainly simplifications and banalities about human behavior with little convincing illumination of how they came to be banal. And he goes on and on and on. And so, I don't know. So go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
I've never noticed,
I'll give you the last word.
No. It's not true. I know John very well. He attended a evolution and cognition seminar back when we were at Stanford. You have to be really following the literature very closely. It's not, evolutionary psychology is not just what you read about in the newspaper.
Yeah.
There are a lot of detailed results that are very specific and some quite surprising. What I wanted to say about the case of race, if I may.
Well, you got to do it in 10 seconds. Okay.
In 10 seconds. Evolutionary psychological approach tells you that that's going to be a byproduct of some other mechanism. We thought it was a byproduct of coalitional mechanisms. We found after 20 years of people not being able to find circumstances that decrease race encoding, the first time out, based on our hypothesis, we were able to decrease the extent to which people noticed and remembered other people's race.
Well, Leda, on that one, we're going to have to thank you for joining us.
So, Leda,
Thank you very
thanks a
much for
lot,
having
not only for joining us, but also for a lot of interesting materials I read in preparation for this, and hope to talk to you again.
Our guest has been Leda Cosmides, professor of psychology at UC Santa Barbara, co-author of What is Evolutionary Psychology, and co-editor of The Adapted Mind, Evolutionary Psychology and the Generation of Culture. So, John, what do you think? What did you learn today? Pretty good stuff, huh?
Today, and actually I did a little reading ahead of time, it's quite fascinating stuff. A lot of subtle argumentation back and forth. I tend to think Dupre's right when I read him. I tend to think that Leda Cosmides is right when I read her. I tend to think that Dan Dennett is right when I read him.
A wishy-washy guy.
Yeah, I'm just, my Stone Age brain is not up to these modern debates.
It's amazing. There is, I don't know if our listeners have a sense of how intense the disagreement is among people who advocate evolutionary psychology and people who disagree with it. I mean, there are people who attack evolution from the right because they think it's all creation, but there is a whole set of professional academics who violently attack evolutionary psychology on grounds somewhat like Dupre's. But I think they're wrong. I think there's a lot of promise in the thing.
Well, we'll have to have that UC anthropologist on someday, and she can explain her view more thoroughly. I do want to thank all the people who sent us email and all the callers who didn't get on.
And we'll continue this conversation on our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org. And just how exactly do we measure brain development? Here to sum it up in just over 1 minute, Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. We may not agree on what mind is, but we sure like to measure it. The first standardized intelligence test was published in 1905 by French psychologist Alfred Binet. Then American Stanford psychology professor Louis Ternan adapted it. He divided test takers' mental age, as revealed by their score, by their chronological age, to get a number called the intelligence quotient, or IQ. And so was born the Stanford Binet IQ test. It got a huge push during World War I when the Army gave IQ tests to 1.7 million inductees. Now, Ternan wanted his test to identify students who needed extra help. But the idea of such a test is rooted in social Darwinism. Identify the intelligent, make them our leaders, and they will lead us to a better tomorrow. In the 30s, Harvard President James Bryan Conant wanted to make the institution more egalitarian, admit students based on ability rather than ancestry. Harvard turned to Carl Brigham, who wrote a study of American intelligence about the World War I Army intelligence tests, arguing that the results proved that the Nordic race was smarter than the others. He repudiated his racist views in the 30s, but it was this Carl Brigham who created the SAT. These kinds of intelligence tests are still administered, but there's been a backlash in the last 30 years or so. In 1971, the U.S. Supreme Court banned most IQ tests for employment. Still, British Prime Minister Tony Blair often voices his commitment to a meritocracy, that is, a society that doles out success to people based on their talents and abilities. Michael Young had coined the word in 1958 in his novel The Rise of the Meritocracy, a dystopian satire in which his invented formula, I plus E equals M, intelligence plus effort equals merit, creates a new ruling class. The novel ends badly, with the stupid rising up against the smart. Michael Young had a long career as a progressive. In 1945, he helped draft the manifesto that transformed the Labor Party. He worked to create a society in which, as he wrote, quote, every human being would have equal opportunity not to rise up in the world in the light of any mathematical measure, but to develop his own special capacities for leading a rich life, unquote. He died in 2002. He once wrote, a meritocracy can only exist in any full form if there was such a narrowing down of values that people could be put into rank order of worth. Or if I can have the last word, if I'm so poor, why ain't I dumb? I gotta go.
Wow, Ken, my head is dizzy from 60 seconds of rapid-fire philosophy.
If your head is dizzy, that means you've got a conundrum in your mind, and we can solve it for you, can't we, John?
Yes. Go to our webpage,
conundrums@philosophytalk.org, or hit that conundrums button on the webpage. We won't promise to solve your problem, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Dave Fusaro, Nicole Sawaya, Ben Temshin, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association and from various groups at Stanford University.
And even more support from the Friends of Philosophy Talk and from the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.